Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Enabling Secure Application Access to the Public Cloud. My name is Kevin Cook and I'm a Market Development Manager with Terakai Corporation. Today I'm pleased to introduce Michael O'Brien. Michael is an industry leader on the topic of security and application access and will present today on anytime, anywhere access to your critical business applications. Without further delay, welcome Michael.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Thanks again for having me on the webinar. And really, when we talk about enabling secure application access to the public cloud, what we're going to be talking about a lot is mobility functionality. So how can I extend out my corporate reach to the users that are outside of my office, maybe working from home? You see a lot of questions up here. So how can I do more with less, and how can I work better with partners? I want to use a device I'm comfortable with, like an iPhone or a BlackBerry, to help me be more productive. So we're looking at a few of these big trends that are being introduced into the business world. So we've got a lot of trends that are coming in from a global standpoint. So how can I look at not only working with a company down the street from me, but maybe I have a manufacturing partner that's halfway around the world. So we're looking at things like the global value chain and how I can do business with these partners a lot more productively and a lot more seamlessly, whether I'm inside my corporate firewall or, more importantly, for the most part, outside of the firewall. How can I have the same experience? We're also looking at something that's helping to increase those complexities by looking at things like information overload. So if you look at it about, say, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago, everybody is familiar with the term the information age. So we went from, the Stone Age to the Iron Age to the information age. And nowadays, when we look at 2010, we're looking at it more from a participation age. So how can I be more interactive with the tools that I use every day and collaborate better with my peers, coworkers, even my business partners, or even friends and family? How can I use technology to make that easier? We're looking at things that are commonly referred to as tools in the Web 2.0 realm. So looking at things like blogs and wikis. Simple things like text messages. How can I incorporate all of these different types of information feeds to make my life easier and more productive from a business standpoint? We're also looking at things like consumerization. So looking at the devices that most people tend to view as those fun new phones or things like an iPad. But how can I bring those into a business world, a tool that I'm comfortable with, and use that for business productivity purposes? As a business owner or an IT decision maker, those bring in a lot of questions and a lot of complexities into my IT organization that I need to address. For one, I want to allow people to use devices that they're comfortable with, that they can be more productive with. But on the second hand, how can I protect my corporate IP or my intellectual property and make sure that that's still secure? And last but not least, we're looking at things like worker mobility. So nowadays, we don't necessarily go to work. Work comes to us. So how can I be productive from anywhere using whatever device I want and do that securely? So a lot of these complexities and trends are adding a lot of impact onto my business. So how can I afford to do all of this? It's always it's one of those things where you always look at it from a need versus a want. Now, from a want standpoint, we could look at it simply, and I'll use an iPhone. Not that I'm using that example as a promotion for the device, but its popularity is so great within both the business and the consumer worlds that it's becoming increasingly popular to use that as a work device. So how can I afford to allow my users to not only use those devices, but to purchase all of those devices, the service contracts that go along with them? Do I have the money to do that, to provide all of the back-end infrastructure in order to support that? Have you ever gotten the feeling that the world around you is moving too fast? Absolutely. Applications are coming out daily. With the platforms that we have nowadays, it's a lot easier to create an application that can be accessed via a web browser than it would be to create your own interface for that app to run as a standalone application on a desktop. The beauty of being able to create those applications is that I can extend them further than my typical corporate boundaries and unleash those mobile capabilities for that type of app. Now, if we were to look at the evolution of the mobile workforce, there's a scary number up there, and if each organization has its own unique makeup, but if you looked at it on a global basis, almost 90% of employees nowadays have some type of remote functionality, whether it's full-time being a teleworker where they work from home or from a single-person office, to a full-blown branch office for an organization that might have 30, 40 people in there. Or better yet, from my position, I travel a lot for work. So how can I stay in contact with all of my productivity apps and my collaboration apps from anywhere that I am? As Kevin, who introduced it, can attest to, I've spent many a times on the phone with them sitting from an airport, and it allows me to use technology to still be productive and to help. So how can I make that mobile workforce work for my company? How we're going to do that is through things like Web 2.0, like I mentioned. How can I make applications more accessible outside of my corporate boundaries? How can I allow my business partners to gain access to the applications and the information they need so that we can streamline our operations? How can I use collaboration tools to keep people in touch with each other? No longer is decision-making taking months to do, or is acceptable to take months to do. Now it's meant to be done in a matter of days or even hours to make a decision that can impact an entire organization. Now, some of the big business imperatives that we run into are people are looking for the anytime, anywhere access using whatever device that they happen to be using at that time, whether it is a smartphone device or even things like a kiosk within, say, a hotel that they're staying at. And how can I keep that secure? How can I also remain compliant and put in place business continuity measures to make sure that my business is able to keep running? It's a scary fact, and I always hate to use this example based on a cultural ramification, but if you think about the last big hurricanes that we've had, Katrina being one that comes to mind right off the bat, if you look at companies that don't have business continuity in place at that time when Katrina hit, if you look at the amount of businesses that are still left around that didn't have those measures in place, almost 90% of them are no longer in business. So having a continuity plan and being compliant with things like federal regulations, it's no longer a want for companies, it's something that they need to have. We need to be innovative in the way that we address things like business processes and how our go-to-market strategies. So innovation is definitely a big key driver for a lot of businesses that are out there. And one of the other big things is in the past, say, 4 or 5 years, is the concept of being green. So how can I reduce my carbon footprint on the environment and still maintain competitiveness within the organization? Coming from a company that just received their ISO certification, there was a lot of different measures that need to be put in place in order to be stamped that Go Green from an environmental perspective. So really, what is mobility? So we can look at mobility in a couple different ways. So for one, everybody's probably familiar with the term Wi-Fi or wireless connectivity. That's the simplest form of mobility technology that exists. So it's a simple concept of having wireless access maybe throughout the building or in a warehouse or wherever you may be providing a work environment. Or it could be as simple as a wireless hotspot within a coffee shop. So simply put, mobility could be looked at as just a wireless connectivity, so using either Wi-Fi or cellular technologies to connect. So it's the simplest thing to look at mobile technology as. And a good concept is no longer am I stuck to my desk if I need to move into a conference room to continue working on a collaborative project. I can take my devices and my applications with me and gain access to them. So another version that you could look, or another way you can look at mobility, is having that same working experience, regardless of whether I'm sitting at my desk using a desktop like I normally would, say, 10, 15 years ago. But what if I am on a train or if I'm in an airport? How can I have that same that I need to be productive inside or outside of my corporate barriers. So we can look at mobility as a technology, or we can look at mobility as a concept. So what I'm going to hopefully go over today is looking at some of the market transitions that we're going into in regards to mobility and giving our users access to the information that they need, the applications that they need, and the communication paths that they need in order to maintain that competitive edge. Now, some of the big market drivers that we're running into is absolutely mobility. And when I talk mobility, we're looking at the actual devices themselves. So as you can see, we're looking at almost 1.5 billion new devices that are going to be introduced into the networking world. If everybody's heard of the term IPv6, this is one of the main drivers in moving from IPv4 to IPv6 technology to make sure that we have space and addresses for all of these new devices that are coming in. We're looking at devices in the past that would be simply put as a laptop that needed to be put onto a network from a mobile standpoint, to looking at everything now from smartphones that are now Wi-Fi capable. We're looking at asset tracking devices, RFID tagging. All of these devices that have Wi-Fi capabilities or cellular capabilities are being considered in a networked mobile device category. Another, a second big piece to this is the proliferation of video, and in particular pervasive video, meaning that you know, if you looked at it 10 years ago, a simple phone call was a good way to interact with somebody else. But to gain that more personable approach, we had to go in go to meet that person in face-to-face. So with that, you have a lot of travel expenses that come along with it. Looking at video as a way to share information and really gain that true face-to-face communication when we could be halfway around the world is becoming a very, again, not a need or not a want into an organization, but a need for an organization. We're also looking at video as a way to share information. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in real time. It could be things like streaming video or video blogging, where I can now add that add another level of intimacy to the information that I'm trying to provide to others. And then we're looking at it from a workplace experience. Like I said before, it's, we don't go to work anymore. Work comes to us. So I want to be free to work from anywhere, using any device, and gain access at any given time. Now, I know it sounds like a pretty blanket statement to you know, just unlock these controls into an environment, but there's a big reason for it. So, and a lot of the reasoning behind that comes from competitiveness. It also comes from our employees driving these trends to be more comfortable with devices that they're familiar with. So no longer is it just the concept of using a desktop as being my compute resources. Why not give me the ability to use a device that I have on me at all times in order to be productive? So we've got more people working from more places using more devices than ever that are accessing the same information as before, but now with an extra sense of sensitivity to the information that's coming and going from my environment. Now, we could look at it in 3 different ways, and in the past, these 3 different areas were looked at as almost siloed areas within my environment. So what we're looking at is the location border. Those lines are being blurred. There's no such thing anymore as having internal applications and external applications that a user is going to access. They want the same look and feel regardless of whether they're inside or outside. If we were to look at internal-facing apps, how can I keep those secure and still gain access to them from the outside? If I have an application that was more meant for external use, like a web page or some type of external application for, I don't know, things like logistics that my partners can access, how can I provide the same type of interface and experience regardless of where that application is specifically located? We're also looking at things in terms of a device border. So looking at traditionally, if I were to give someone mobile access, it simply meant having Wi-Fi access within the building. So you were essentially on the same network, that same secure inside network. But how can I allow that device to leave my environment and be secure on the outside? How can I look at it from using new interfaces? So looking at smartphones, looking at things like netbooks, or looking at physical devices outside the network, so I can do things like asset tracking for devices that leave my organization and see them through all the way through to the end. If you've ever seen the IBM commercial that shows where prescription drugs are being tracked from the makers all the way down to the store shelves, that's exactly what I'm talking about with blurring the lines of the device type. And when we're talking that commercial, we're looking at things like mobile scanners and other devices that are showing up on top of the network, things like asset tags. And last but not least, you can also look at it from an application border. Users want the same experience regardless of whether they're inside or outside of your network, whether they work for your company or a partner from your company. They want to have that anytime access using whatever device it is. So we have to look at applications that are very flexible in terms of what devices access them and what their look and feel in terms of being productive with that. Now, there's a few things that are essential to the way that we can look into moving into a more mobile environment or creating that concept of a mobile workforce. If we were to start and look at it in terms of information, if you were to look at it in the past, it was really coming from a single source. So it was a file server or a database that people would gain access to. Nowadays, with the way that applications are written and the way that they're driven, you can be looking at multiple different back-end applications. Even though you're using the same front end, it can be using multiple different databases to pull information from. I now want information in real time. I'm not looking at information that has just been stored away on a file server for later access. We're looking at a mobile workforce in the past as being primarily inside the walls of my building. That was my company base. You know, a lot of people had a traveling workforce, but really they were disconnected from a lot of the applications that they needed access to. Nowadays, we're looking at dispersed teams outside the organization, looking at outsourcing things. You know, if you were to partner with a marketing firm for some type of marketing venture, even though that company is working for your benefit, they still want the same experience that they could get if they were an employee within the company. So how can we extend that out into a more dispersed team of our workers? We're looking at it from a community standpoint. In the past, we were looking at static resources that were set up specifically for these purposes and teams that had specific roles. Those lines, again, have been blurred. In today's workforce, we're looking at more dynamic teams, pulling from multiple different sources of information and creating information in a more dynamic fashion. Looking at the context of the mobile workforce, you had to go out and find the information you needed and find the people that you needed to talk to. Nowadays, we can use technology to gain access to those subject matter experts within our organization in real time. So to see their availability and their expertise in a real-time fashion to help streamline our business processes to make us more efficient. In security, this was an absolute must from a siloed perspective 10 years ago. Now, security itself, it's a tussle. Why? Because if you were to look at it from a security/networking standpoint, network access is the ability to give access to anything. And security, on the other hand, that mentality was to prohibit access to a lot of things. So you had a very big tug of war going on. The easiest way to do this, let's secure everything off from the outside world. Nowadays, that doesn't work. If I secure it off from the outside world, I defeat the purpose of getting a more global reach for information and allowing people to do things like be a part of a mobile workforce. Why? I have to be outside the office. It's absolutely a concern of mine, and hopefully I'll show you a few ways that we can help to alleviate that. So what we're looking at from a mobile environment is the concept of a borderless experience. So not having the walled-off approach that we had from a traditional network setup, but breaking down that wall and basically extending our network out into almost anywhere. So whether it is that coffee hotspot or using a cellular device from a train, I can gain access to the resources and anyone that I need to get access to using whatever device I need at any time of the day from anywhere. We no longer go from working hours but to working moments. So I find myself at times my best productivity time might be 9:30 at night when I'm sitting on my couch at home, but I still need that seamless access and that borderless experience that I would get as if I was sitting at my desk at work. Now, if we were to look at it from a mobile application vision, so how can we start to look at some mobile components that are out there to help to achieve this goal? First, we're going to look at things like what devices are people using. Nowadays, probably some of the more popular devices are going to be laptops, looking at things like BlackBerries, iPhones, iPads, smart devices. And then looking at people, looking what people are doing. So are they doing email? Do they need access into collaborative tools? Are they looking at things like ERP systems or some type of accounting information within the environment? And then looking at it from a telephony standpoint. So how can I extend my collaboration aspects outside the network? And then looking at it from wherever you are. Now, some of the challenges that you'll run into is creating that ubiquitous access inside or outside the office. So making sure that the same experience is given to a user, whether they're in or out, or whether they work for your company or they're a partner of your company. Looking at it from a security policy, one of the biggest struggles that people had by allowing mobile devices to be used by their workforce was, how can I make sure that that device is secure? So how can I make sure that if someone's using an instant messaging function on their phone, that they're not also using the send file functionality within that device to breach a corporate security policy? So how can I extend out my policy to these mobile users? Whether they're working on a laptop at home using a VPN tunnel, or whether they are using a smartphone that has storage capabilities on it and has the risk of information leakage. Then we're also looking at it from a consumerization standpoint. Now, if you try and get consumerization past the spell checker, it'll never pass. But it's an absolutely a true trend that's happening. People buy mobile devices for their ease of use. Now they want to extend that ease of use into their working lives. So it's not necessarily companies that are pushing these devices down to their users. It's the exact opposite. It's the users within the environment that are almost mandating that they want to have choice in what type of device they use. Now, this can also be seen with from a comfort level. I know a lot of companies nowadays are looking at it from a technology acquisition standpoint. Rather than standardizing on a piece of hardware, letting their employees decide what type of hardware that they're going to use. If they're more comfortable using a netbook versus a full-blown desktop, so be it. And they're looking at things like creating policies more on the stipend side, saying here's X amount of money to provide your corporate access. Really do what you want with it. We've got the measures in place to make sure that it's secured. Now, one of the other big problems that you run into from a mobile solution might not necessarily be from an individual user or from an individual mobile user standpoint, but looking at more along the lines of extending out our networks into things like remote offices or regional offices, or looking at employees from a teleworker standpoint. How can I make sure that applications that were written for LAN-like capabilities can be extended out across my WAN to those remote offices, those regional offices, even now down to my mobile devices using technology like cellular, and gain the same application experience that they're looking for as if they were sitting on the same network as that application resides. So how can I distribute these resources out while at the same time providing a lot of consolidation and operating expense savings by centralizing all of my resources and assets into one location, or more commonly into, say, two locations, so a primary and a secondary location. Now, some of the problems, one of the easy ways in the past, I should say, to gain this type of access was looking at it from a simple VPN solution. So allowing people to gain remote access via, say, a software client. Now, one of the traditional ways that you could look at VPN technology was someone with a VPN connection on their laptop just connecting up and trusting that whatever's on that end machine is going to pass my security policy of what's acceptable. Now, this always isn't the easiest thing to track from a traditional remote access VPN. Basically, once that tunnel's open, it's almost like an inlet for everything on the other side of that tunnel. So how can I look to technology to help prevent access that goes against my security policy? Now, how I can do that is by looking at different types of application controls. So looking at a VPN solution or a remote access solution that gives me the granularity to create policies. So I gave an example of before of providing somebody with instant messaging access. But at the same time, how can I create a policy that goes that goes along with my corporate security policy that says, you know what, you can instant message with somebody else, but I don't want you sending anything over to that other person. So I can gain the granularity to be able to do this type of access control policy by using technology. And a lot of it was forced and introduced from allowing people to gain mobile access into the information and the resources that they need. Now, the other thing that I can look at is things like context awareness. So looking at the different types of traffic that users are generating, everything from instant messaging to whatever role that you are assigned within an organization, looking at things like what type of media are you using and what type of bandwidth are you using. I can look at all of these things to help identify what type of traffic or what user it is on the network, whether they're inside or outside. I can look at it from an application standpoint. Are they going to Facebook? Are they using YouTube? Are they looking at it from a peer-to-peer application? I can also look at it from where that user is. Are they inside the environment? Are they outside the environment? Are they on a Wi-Fi hotspot? Are they on a cellular network? Are they on a laptop? Are they on an iPhone? So I can look at it from a location standpoint, and then look at traffic from a priority from that mobile device. So if I had technology in place to or maybe had a video in place, I could have a policy that states, don't compress that video if someone's on, a large enough pipe where it wouldn't affect the experience that that person's, would be seeing the video in. If it's on a slower connection, why don't I use some type of compression technology in order to make that video more seamless? I can look at it from an object standpoint, and when I say an object standpoint, I'm looking at different types of file access that people are gaining access to, or whether they're not gaining access to it based on the policy that I'm looking at. And then, like I said before, looking at what type of device that they're coming in on. What will I allow, what won't I allow? And if I'm on a certain type of device, these are the types of access that you can gain. Now, how else do I enable secure mobility? Actually, web usage has really driven this this trend. So I can look at things by securing my application outlets from my internal environment. I can alleviate things like data loss. I can alleviate a lot of the threats that are out there by securing my mobile users down via policy and using technology to do things like scan endpoints, make sure that the endpoint device meets my security policy and that it's being used in an acceptable manner. Now, the other thing that I can look at is moving away from multiple different types of devices on a remote user or a teleworker standpoint, and condensing them down and looking at them more as a service versus a device usage. So rather than having 6 different ways and applications in order to gain remote access, looking at just providing that end user connectivity back to the office and providing out to them the different services they need, like telephony services, file services, email services, from a network service perspective versus looking at it from a hardware or device perspective. And at the same time, making sure that I have control over how and what they're accessing in the corporate environment. And what we could look at that is a conceptual virtual office. So to allow those remote teleworkers to remain as productive as they were as if they were sitting in the office. We can also look at it from a security standpoint. So looking at it from a borderless aspect. If we're going to take down the borders to our environment, we can't risk doing that from a security perspective without the proper measures being in place. So am I looking at all the different areas that are going to allow mobile access and making sure that I have the right security policies in place to help me not only information security policy, but also if there was up against any type of regulatory requirements for compliance's sake. Then I can also look at it from an application velocity standpoint. So how can I add intelligence into the way that my applications are delivered out to my remote users or my mobile users? I can look to technology to do things like finding not only the least hop method to getting access to an application, which is very traditional, saying that, oh, I should take this path because it's the shortest path that I have. Now I can add intelligence into the way that applications are delivered to look at multiple different pieces of criteria to make sure that I'm giving that user the best experience of that application and making sure that it works. So now I can look at things like if one service provider is down or one outlet is down, looking at other POPs or other paths to gain access into that application. What if I had a longer path, but it actually had more bandwidth there? So I can look into gaining intelligence into my application access by looking into technology as well to provide that anytime, anywhere access. Now, that in a very quick 35 minutes, I went over definitely a lot, quite a few different pieces of mobile access. And what I was trying to achieve is just to get you thinking on how you can look to providing that mobile access out to your users in a more secure manner, as well as looking at it from taking down the borders of standardization on certain devices that users are looking at, and opening the doors to allowing your users to be more comfortable with the way that they use technology.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So let's jump right in. Let's jump right into the question and answer. Our first question is from Tim, and Tim asks, what types of devices are people using to create a borderless experience? Any special software needed for them to interoperate with an existing infrastructure?
Well, a lot of it is really, from a device perspective, you can almost look at anything now that has network capabilities. Everything from your smartphones. You know, like I said, I used the iPhone as an example. It's probably just one of the most recognizable ways to, one of the most recognizable devices that mobile users would use. For instance, if I were to gain corporate access, I don't necessarily need special software on or a special revision of software on the iPhone. All I need is a simple app on there that would allow me to gain secure access back into my applications. I can also look at my smartphones, things like BlackBerries or Nokia devices, and I can put a special piece of software on them. Again, we're writing like a little app on the phone to do things like extend that device out and make it seem like it's my office desk phone. So people are using everything from netbooks to laptops. Even I've worked with some logistic companies who are using little handheld computers, mobile out in you know, areas like a warehouse. So really, as long as the device is network enabled, you can do a lot with it, and there's a lot of choice out there.
Excellent, thank you. And another related question, how or what type of security concerns can we anticipate with that influx of those consumer devices that you mentioned?
Well, in the past, a lot of it had to do, everybody's familiar with the term hacking. Really, what you can look at to anticipate are things like device theft. And how can I secure that device if an unknown user is actually using it? It's probably the most common security risk that you can anticipate by allowing mobile devices out there. How do you know it's actually the user that is using the device that has, you know, the acceptable user on that device? And how we can do that is just by putting in back-end security measures. So the sad part with security, the bad guys are always looking at new ways. So having a proactive approach to security is the probably the best philosophy to have in order to protect your organization.
Excellent, Michael. Another question around managing these devices from Dennis. How do you manage and monitor all of the security on these different devices with a small IT staff?
With a small IT staff, management tools. So how I would start by looking at and managing those mobile devices is absolutely looking at a policy-based approach to managing the devices, and really deciding on what type of access you want the device to have. So you can set security policy on mobile devices to allow them that if they're on, all of the traffic from that device is going through your corporate environment so that you can maintain a secure access, or I should say secure control over what's going on in that device. It's also another way that you can extend out things like telephony services down to that device to make it seem like it's part of your network. There's lots of different management tools out there for the mobile devices. The hard part is you're always reliant on a third party, and that third party is typically your cellular provider. So going with a reputable source for connectivity is something else to look at.
Excellent. One more question, more about the return on investment or cost savings. How does introducing mobile capabilities into a company or into an organization equate to cost savings in the long run?
Well, there's always that tussle with, absolutely CapEx versus OpEx. So anytime you introduce new technology into an environment, you're typically taking that initial CapEx hit to the organization. But really where you can start to see a lot of OpEx savings by allowing people to be more mobile is if you were to look at it just arbitrarily, if I had a company of 500 people, think of the size environment that you'd need to maintain if you were to have them all work from one location. Think about all the extraneous costs that are being passed on to the employees by all the travel that's involved to get to and from that environment. Now, if I don't have to worry about so much the physical working environment, as long as my users have access into the applications that they need, you can start to see some significant cost savings by allowing people to work remotely and giving them the technology to be just as productive as if they were sitting sitting inside the environment. It's also the first step into really helping a company go more green within their organization. So by reducing things like that carbon footprint that I was talking about.
Michael, getting back to some of the security and management side of the conversation, we have a question here from Mustafa, and he asks, do you suggest installing secure certificates on devices and checking them for virus protection, Windows patches, etc., before letting them connect to your cloud solution?
Absolutely. Certificates are, and most of the time the certificates are actually hardware-based certificates that I can lock down on a per-device level. That's typically something that's a necessity to do unless you're using some type of a simple application like a cloud service like email, where I don't really need to, all I need is a username and password to typically gain access to that service. If I'm giving a device a network access, where it's going to have access to different services like telephony services, file services, chat services that are on the inside of my environment, the certificate approach is absolutely the best way to start the security policy. Why? Because it's that handshake between your environment and that device, and you can control that. Now, in terms of patches and things like that, that really all depends on the operating system of that mobile device. If I'm talking about laptops, absolutely looking into more of a patch management solution for those mobile devices and setting a policy that makes sure that they're up to date. So looking at things like network access controls, a network access control solution to make sure that the device itself, if it's been off the network for a month and it finally comes back on, making sure that it meets my most up-to-date security policy.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And I'd like to thank all of you in attendance for your participation and insightful questions today. I hope this webinar met your expectations. Terakai will be hosting these regularly, and we'd love your input on topics. Thank you again, and good afternoon.
Thanks, Kevin.